Welcome back, everybody, to our third set of classes for our fall harvest scene. And theoretically, your picture is getting finished somewhere in the neighborhood of looking like this. And never worry, we're going to use our fourth class to come back and kind of tidy up and tinker with any of the little miscellaneous things that we're not sure about. So today, again, we'll use the same colors: yellow, white, red cadmium, the burnt sienna, and the blue. And we're going to start by taking, any brush will work, but we're going to use it as a dry brush. So I haven't wet this brush, and I'm just going to go into my burnt sienna, get a little bit of paint on each side, and then I'm going to wipe it off a little bit. Don't want to have too much paint on my brush. And for that, we're just going to kind of wisp in some areas in the front here that can work as stems for our grasses. And they can crisscross. They don't have to all go right down to the bottom, because we're going to add more on top of this. But you see I'm not using very much paint. It's just to get started on the impression of those grasses. We don't want a heavy amount, so even though I'm putting a little paint on, I'm wiping a lot of that paint off again. And I'm just going to crisscross here right over to the very edge. And when I get to this side by the sunflowers, I'll do a little bit there, but a lot of this is going to get covered up with our sunflower stems. And if there's any just little chunks that are standing out to you that seem like they might be too heavy a paint, just go over them again and take a little bit of that off. And just kind of, we want it to have kind of a not too organized look to it. We just want to get some stems in. And then next we're going to take, and you can take a paper towel to remove any of your excess paint. And rather than wet it, and then we're just going to go into our yellow paint and some blue paint, and we're going to add some green stems. So you can see the more yellow you add, the lighter the green, and the more blue, the darker the green. And we're just going to add some green, dry brushed stems in there as well. And we still are going to have lots of light showing because of that yellow background that we have. So it really gives us a good basis to work from. So a little bit of yellow, a little bit of green, or a little bit of blue, sorry. And then we're just going to add some more. And if the tones aren't exactly the same all the time, well, of course they're not in nature as well. There's lots of different shades of green. There's lots of different shades of blue and browns, especially at this time of year. And I tend to like to add more of the green on this side where the sunflowers are going to be, because those greens are going to be more similar to the shade of the sunflower stems. So I'm going to kind of concentrate my green a little bit more on this side. But again, it's still just creating a backdrop for our eye to get fooled into thinking we've got a lot of foliage going on in there. And these can crisscross and they can be curved. If they're curved, there's maybe a bit of more breeze, and that's just fine. So that's what you would call a dry brush technique, because you haven't wet your brush prior to using it, and you just use a paper towel to wipe it off with. And at this juncture, when you think you've got enough of that done, then you can pop it in your water, because if you leave your brush with that paint on it, it will get really dry and hard to clean. So we want to make sure we put it in the water after, and we can always dry it off with a paper towel and get it ready to use again. So I want to show you another little trick for increasing your background and your foliage, and that's using a sponge. Now there's different ways you can do this. You could use a stenciling brush, which has very stiff bristles, or what I call a scruffy brush, and scruffy brushes to me are those brushes that have stiff bristles. Sometimes they're even ones that aren't really good for painting anymore, but you can still use them. And the other thing I want to show you today is sea sponge, and we'll put a little sea sponge in with all your kits. It's a nice way to work with foliage. We want to get the idea that there is some heads of grain on this bit of land by the edge of the road. So I'm going to take a brush, and just because my paint has been sitting a while, I need to soften it up a little bit. So I'm going to take a little yellow and a little white, and if I add a little bit of that burnt sienna to it, I will get a yellow ochre color. And some of you who paint often might have yellow ochre at home. It's a really great color for fall scenes. You see it a lot in wheat fields and things like that. So I'm just trying to get kind of a little off-white, kind of different shade than what we've got. Then we would take our sponge and go right into that. And the sea sponge has more holes in it than a regular kitchen sponge. So when you put it on, it will show a little different texture. This, right now, we need a little bit more paint on it. And it's got a lot of, it really needs a little more of the background wisped in, so it will show up a little bit better. And that, I'll just hastily put myself in a little bit more here. And then we're going to take this sponge and just dip it in the paint we've mixed. And when you press it on, we just want it to have that look at the top of how a wheat stem or a weed stem or some wild oats by the edge of the road would look. And I'm tending towards the white here because they will show up a little bit better. And we can always fill more in later, but this just gives us a start. And the colors can change as you need them to make sure that they'll show up. So we're just going to dab that in with, but you could use your stenciling brush, and I'll do that, a little of that for you as well, so you can see the difference. So we're just starting to fill these areas in a little bit to make it give it that wild edge of the road effect. I'm not going to do anything over here because we have some intense work to do with those sunflowers yet, so we're not going to worry about that part. We'll put it over here a little bit. Now, if I was using the stenciling brush, which looks like this, it would be very similar. You just get a little bit of white, a little bit of yellow. I'm going to add a little bit of the burnt sienna to tone it down a little bit. And I can just press it against them. Now the difference with this stenciling brush is it's quite wide, so I might have to use the corner of it to not get such a dense bit of color on. So I'm just going to dab a little bit in here and there. You can see how you can get a very similar effect I think for this one, I prefer the sea sponge, but also if you have a scruffy brush that's kind of a flat one, you can get kind of some nice up and down motion with that as well. And again, with the stenciling brush, same as with your other brush, you put it in water after because you want to be able to clean that well. Now we're going to move to our sunflower and start a little work with them. So I'd like you to take your smallest brush, might be a script liner, might be a number 2 round, and we're just going to dampen that brush. We are not going to use a dry brush technique for this. And we're going to go into our burnt sienna. And with the burnt sienna, we're going to put the shadows in to our sunflowers. Now, you could add a tiny bit of blue if you want, but you don't want to get it too dark. There, that's kind of a nice shadowy color. Now on each sunflower, there's going to be petals going around that sunflower head, and we're just going to make some curved lines. And these curved lines will actually be on the shadowy side of the sunflower. So right now these don't look like petals. You're going to tend to have it look more like a spider. So we're going for some spiders right now. The petals will be shorter on the right hand side and longer on the left hand side because we're closer. These heads are turned slightly towards the sun. So here's our shadowy part. And then on this side, not as large, still in shadow, still be thinking the sun is coming from this direction. So what part of that plant will have the shadow? And some of them are angled more than others. If you have a narrower opening that's turned a little bit, that head, sorry. So we're just going to put in a few shadows in there on each one. This one looks like it's got a little bit of a shadow started. And I'm making them curvy. There's all different kinds of sunflowers, and sunflowers are one of those flowers it can have quite structured leaves, where they are very fisheye shaped, I guess you'd say. It comes to a point. I'm kind of a fan of the Van Gogh variety, where they're a little more wavy. But in a field of sunflowers, I think they do tend to be more the standard variety. I'm going to say these ones are growing wild by the edge of this field, and they've taken a turn for the wild side. Now there's going to be some overlap here, and those are decisions you'll have to make as you go along if you want your this flower to be in front or this flower to be in front. So there's always little decisions to be made. And this one, it actually looks like it's facing down a little bit. So we might do that with this one, just because it happened to work out that way. You can gauge your sunflowers by what you have actually made in your original making of the circles. So that's got us some shadows, some dark areas to work from. Now, once we get the shadows in, we're going to take our white to put the petals in our sunflowers. Not yellow, but our white. And the reason for that is because in acrylics, yellow paint is very transparent. It will have a hard time covering any of the background. And so instead, we'll put a white base down. And the white base will help to sort of shape these sunflowers. We'll create the petals with the white. And then we'll be going over those later with the yellow to get it the yellow color. So remember, I'm thinking always that brown line is our shadow. So I'm just going to leave that showing, it's exposed. And I'm just waving this white on top of that. It comes to a point and all your white will get completely covered with the yellow later on, as will your shadow. So in this instance, I picture to myself that the sun is coming down and maybe there's a bit showing here and catching the light, and maybe there's a bit down there. So you have to be thinking to yourself all the time, where is that light going to come from? And it will be different on each side of the sunflower, and it will be different for each petal. So here's this one catching the light here, and maybe on this side, and I'm having it more petal shaped now. It's coming to a point, thicker at the bottom near the head of the sunflower. And it comes up here. You can make some twisty edges on those if you wish. And bit by bit, we'll slowly fill this sunflower in. That one just looks like he needs one more petal. Again, here, I'm thinking, okay, there's going to be some light here, but it might be here in this instance. It will fill in here. So now we have less spider-like, starting to be a little more flower-like for each of these sunflowers. Again, feeling like I need a little bit more there. So our next stage we'll give this white a chance to dry. If we tackle the yellow too soon and the white hasn't dried enough, then it will just blend together, and again the lack of opaqueness, the transparency of that yellow will end up, we won't get good coverage. So even though we're dying to change these sunflowers into something yellow, we're going to leave it for now. And I'll just finish working these ones, but then we're going to go on and do some stems. So I've made the choice here that this flower is going to be ahead of this flower. So it means that I would do it second, so it would cover up. And it can overlap right over top of that. And it's nice if you can have those overlaps because it makes everything look more natural. You can still see lots of that brown showing though. And we can make some choices as we go along. Well, this is the one we thought might face the other direction, might face downward. Its head's got a little bit droopy. So I might change the petal configuration a little bit on this guy. Because maybe those petals are curling down instead of curling up. This guy, he's really low down. He's probably in a little more shadow than the rest of them. So we won't worry about him too much yet because he might completely change. So right now it looks like you have no more spiders, but perhaps giant daisies. And that's going to change again. Now to move forward into our stems for these flowers, again we're going to do this in two parts. We're going to start up here. We're going to add a little bit of the stems in the top part, but then we're going to stop and we're going to move over into the fence post. And the reason for this is we want to get everything as natural looking as possible. So we're going to take some blue and some yellow. Now in most instances when you mix color, you would take the lighter color first and add the blue to it. Because if you start with the blue like I did there, it has a tendency to take a lot of yellow to cover that up. Now we want to think about where those stems might come. And we're just dodging it in here and there. So I'm not sure of the terminology, I think there's sepals, there's the petals of yellow, and then there's also little small green ones that are on the back of the head of that pumpkin. And the stems tend to come out to the side. So I like to tuck a few little bits of green in those spaces. This one, probably not going to see the stem up high because of that extra sunflower being in there. So we're just making choices as we go. Tiny little bits of green here. And maybe this stem comes off the page, oops, and comes back in. That's pretty thick. We'd have a time covering that, so we'll just take that one out a little bit. But maybe we want a little bit of greenery showing here. And I'm still using the same color of green, but it could change if you mix up if you grab a little bit different color, it'll be just fine. Because there's so many different colors of green that you would see in nature. My brush is getting a little dry. I can tell that because I'm not getting good coverage, so I just dipped it in water. And I'm going to dodge a stem in here. Now we do need some leaves also. So some of those spaces could be filled with the parts of leaves that are coming off your flowers. And a sunflower leaf is kind of the shape of a spade in a deck of cards. So they won't always show because they're in this tangle. I'll try to do one in a clearer spot for you so you can see. Let's tuck one right up here. It's just poking up above. So here's the point. You can make it almost like an upside down heart shape. And then it can have a little stem on it leading off of that. Maybe there's just the point of a leaf showing here and there. And you can see how this is really filling in our spaces. But we still have that light color of yellow in behind, which is representing the light that's coming in behind these flowers. And maybe sometimes we don't know entirely where this petal is coming from, but we will just keep filling it in so we have some. So this one is just naturally creating itself, making it a head down sunflower. So I think we'll oblige it and make that one point downward. So I've just got a start of that. It gives us an idea of where those sunflowers might land, and we can stick some more leaves and stems in as we go. And in that case, I just went right around that petal because I knew I was going to need it. I knew I was going to tuck that in behind. But we do want to get the fence in. So for the fence, we use a little wider brush. or your number 6 flat brush would work fine. And to make gray or brown, take blue and your burnt sienna in this case. You know, other browns will work. And the more burnt sienna you put in, the browner your fence post will be. And the blue helps to gray it out. So blue and brown always make a gray because the complementary colors in that brown is a shade of orange. And we're just going to take a little of that, and we're going to decide where our fence post is going to be. Now these, I notice, are larger sunflowers than on my original design. I'll just show you. So I might have to make the fence a little different. This is the original one, and those flowers are quite a bit smaller. They're off more in the distance. So this fence post is going to be closer. So I'll make that fence post a little bit bigger. I'm debating here in my head, I'm debating whether these are just really healthy sunflowers or if I need to make the fence that much closer. I think we'll do a little mix of the two. So I'm just making a straight down pull here, and in this case I think I'm going to put it ahead, the fence post ahead of that flower. You can have it to the side or tuck it in behind. And then I'm going to take my round brush with that same color and just angle in a fence rail. Now the fence rail is going to go past that post, but it's going to tuck in behind this sunflower. So the sunflower is kind of leaning over the edge of that fence rail. And we're going to add a second fence rail, and I'm putting these on an angle. Just because I think it makes it look more interesting. Now those right now are relatively blue, so we can adapt that color by taking our white. We'll whiten it up a little bit and we'll add a little bit more brown to it and lighten up that color. And remember, the sun will come on this side. We'll have more lightness on this side of your post, maybe a little bit more streaks of light, and it'll also go on top of that rail. The sun will catch it a little bit more than the bottom side of the rail. And this rail is in front of the post, so it shows, and the post-it will cover up the post in behind. Now we want to have some darker shadows in this as well. So I'm going to take more blue and more brown and get a darker color. I just keep mixing it up until I get something that seems to me would look like those shadowy bits of an old dry and dusty fence. And I'll put that darker tone on the bottom. You can see that this will help to make more form. It'll shape that, give the roundness to that fence rail. Well, to me it wasn't quite dark enough to show to make a difference. So I'm rinsing off my brush to get rid of that old color. And I'll just add a little bit more of the dark colors to it. Enough blue and enough brown to get it darker. There, that's starting to look more like a charcoal color. So that should show up a little bit better. There we go. Acrylics are so forgiving that you can change your mind part way and it'll just be fine with it. That just picked up a little bit of that white, so I'm going to cover that up. And I'm putting a few short strokes in because we want this fence to look like it's old and dried and weathered. And down here we're going to do the same thing. I think it's going to be a homemade fence rail that someone took out of the bush, got a poplar tree and shaped it down. Now this is the side of our post that will have the shadow. You see how round those rails look? We wanted to have that happen with our fence post as well. So we'll give it a shadow, maybe a few little short streaks. And remember, we could always bring some foliage around that post as well. That gets us a little bit darker, but I rinsed my brush so that I could get a little darker color even yet. Because we just want to get some little squiggles in there to give it that old, rustic, dried out fence post look. And the top of that fence post will be probably in shadow, so I'm just going to add that in a little bit. So that's how you tuck your fence in. You have to worry if it's going to keep the cows in. It's just a fence that's providing a little added interest to your picture, and it looks much harder than it actually is. So again, we're going to go back then to our foliage, because now we know where that fence rail is. And we can finish the foliage off by filling in some of those spaces with our green. You do want it to kind of make sense in that if there's a line coming from the top, there might be a line heading to the bottom. So it will make sense down there. And I don't like them to show too much. I like it to be more of a mixture. But you can certainly tuck in some well-defined leaves, for example. I'm just taking the yellow and the blue to make some green, and the green is not always the same. There's a leaf that's just popping over the edge just a little bit. And maybe there's the odd leaf facing downwards down here. We can just see the idea of it. You know, maybe there's some escapees off this direction coming off the other side of the post, because it just wouldn't end with the fence rail, would it? So we're just going to add some little character into that as well. We don't want to have a big space between our green and our post, or it will look like we've outlined the post. Another leaf coming up there. If you need a sharper line, you'll have to wet your brush a little more to get a point on it, to give yourself a little chance to get more definition. And you can tinker with that and work away as much or as little as you like. I would probably try to add a little bit more of the green coming out this direction, just because I don't want a really sharp break between what I have as the brown and the yellow and what I have as the green. And I'm going to put a few more bits of grass. Pretty dry brush here. It's not the one I started with, but just because I haven't added more water to this, it's sort of having the same effect. Get that tucked into the corner a little bit. And if you want some brighter greens to that, then just take your same puddle of paint and add a little more of the yellow to it. And you can get a light green as well. Because this is so yellow, it might not show up too much, but it actually, you can see that level of different lightness to it. So it actually does help in a way. So now we've got, theoretically, our sunflower, our white, is quite dry. And so we're going to take either your smallest brush or your small pointy round brush, this one, or your littlest brush, your script liner, whichever you feel more comfortable working in. And I always like to shape them into a point, it helps. And we're just going to go into our yellow now. We have some straight yellow, and my paint's been sitting out a little bit, so I'm just going to grab a little bit from tucked underneath here. So it's just a straight yellow, and we're going to go over this white. And suddenly, and we can go over the brown as well, because that brown is quite dry and it's the shadow, so it's part of your sunflower as well. Just poured a little bit more here for myself because it was a little bit dry. I'll get it to show here. So when I go over the brown, you can see that it doesn't really cover it at all. The brown's still showing there. So I might even have to take a little bit of the burnt sienna, because that yellow is a very transparent color, and add a little burnt sienna to it to make it show up a little bit better. And we're going to cover all of that white petals with the yellow. And if you find you need it, sometimes you will, you can add the burnt sienna to it as well, just to give it a little bit more. Now, the centers of our flowers don't look finished, and there's a reason for that. We're going to do the centers last, finish them off, because the center of a sunflower, the edges of it are over the centers, over the edges of your flower petals. So you find that the center is more well defined if you do it after you do your flower petals. So I'm just dodging in this. You guys can take your time and do a much better job than I'm doing. We're just getting all that white covered up. And then we're going to go back and we're going to work our centers to finish off these flowers. And again, our fourth session is going to be tinkering with all these little areas. We're just trying to get all the base elements in right now. There, that's got most of that white covered, and there's a few spots not, and that's okay too. Now, if you remember, our centers were just straight burnt sienna. But now if we add a little bit of blue to that, And remember, our sun is coming here, so our shadow is going to be on this side. We're just going to give a slight curved line there with blue and burnt sienna. And it's facing up towards the sun. It's like a little moon shape almost, quarter moon. Or you could have it as quite a shallow sea, and that will give you that contour. This guy, remember, he was facing down, so his shadow is going to be on the top. This guy, this poor bedraggled little guy down there, he's having a hard time. This guy, he's sideways, so he's going to face out that direction. And this guy is going to come the same thumbnail moon shape. And rinse your brush, get all the blue out of your brush. And then we're going to take some more burnt sienna and maybe a little bit of white mixed with it. Or sorry, yellow mixed with it, but we'll start with the burnt sienna. Plenty of yellow in the background of this picture, so we might not need it. And even before that blue is dry, you can put that burnt sienna on, because we definitely will see this edge. The left-hand edge, there might be some petals that are obscuring it a little bit, but the right-hand edge, for sure we see it pressed against the petals coming behind, and that helps to give those sunflowers some definite shape. And this guy, his light part is down at the bottom. And this guy, he just needs some help, so we're going to give him some help here. He's not showing up well, so he's going to get a little bit of extra white there to get him to show up a little bit better. And then we'll take the yellow and we'll see if this works. It's not dry yet. It's probably better to wait till it's dry, but I think it'll do the job. There we go. So he's just poking over the edge. Now, you certainly could tinker with it, and we are going to do some more tinkering with them on the next stage of our painting. But in the meantime, we've got a nice start there on these flowers. It's hard to leave them alone. But I'll stop because I want to move on to the last kind of major element of this picture, and that's the tree on the right-hand side here. So for the tree on the right-hand side, we're going to take just our round brush or your smallest brush, whichever you feel more comfortable using. If this round brush is too hard to get a thin line with, then definitely use the smaller liner brush. Taking red and brown mostly, but I've added a little bit of blue to it to get it a little lighter, and I'll just switch to a liner brush. We're going to take that dark color and we're going to add a tree to this side. Now we want this tree to come right up over the last horizon that we can see with the trees. The reason we want that is we're pushing everything back in our picture. It gives us a more pleasing perspective on everything. So this tree is closer to us, and the top of the tree, the branches are very small and light, which means that you need thinner paint and a thin brush to get some nice small light branches. And the best way for me to start is I don't press very hard. I just pick a spot. This is going to be the top of my tree. And with a very little light touch, we're just going to make a little Y. You can add a little bit more to that if you want. And we'll switch brushes. There it is. And we're going to take and add, this one's a little thinner, this brush, so I can do a little more delicate job. So you just make little Ys like that. This guy, he's a Y, and then he comes down here. And we don't have to see all the branches because we can do, we can add leaves in, and that will still give the indication of branches. You need a fairly dark color to be able to show in some instances, but we don't see all the tree trunk either. So we're just making little Ys, but we're leaving space for that tree to have some trunk room. And we're going to put the trunk in first, then we're going to add the leaves, and then we're going to add more branches if we see we might need them. So we can't see that part, so we definitely will need leaves in there. And it's just Ys all the way through. And because we're going to put leaves in front, that will help to shape that tree to make it look more like a three-dimensional tree. That's a pretty thick line. I should have not pressed quite as hard. If you want a thinner line, you need thinner paint and a very light touch. I'm just going to add those here and there. I'm not going to take that tree right to the very bottom. It's just kind of growing out of this scrubby grass there. It can certainly be overlap because trees are three-dimensional. And I might end it right there if we need it a little bit bigger. We can always, but we can't see the bottom of that tree for the grass. So we've got the branches, but now we need the leaves. So same as with our flowers here, we can use our sea sponge and just get a little bit of yellow on the sea sponge, and we can dodge into the red. Oh, that red's a little bit dry. Give it a little bit more here so it's a little wetter. I'm going to go into the red, into the yellow, take a bit off so it doesn't all glob onto your picture. Do a safe spot first so you can get the feel of it. Okay, so that's giving kind of a nice mixture of red and yellow. We're just going to do that again. We're going to go into our yellow and into our red. Don't have too much on your... Now I've got a little space here, so I know there must be some leaves there. Got a little space there. And we're just going to turn out this beautiful fall tree. Let's just see. Light touch again. And if you find you're not liking the shape that your sea sponge is creating, you can certainly change that by using a different spot on the sea sponge. They'll all give a little different angle. I always like to test somewhere on my messy palette just to see what colors I'm getting. And up here at the top, I have to have a pretty light touch there. is quite red, and I think a yellow would show up there, so I'm going to take this red down here instead. This red will really show up well down below. So just adjust your sights as you go. And you can see that the sea sponge, because of its irregular edges, it gives you a nice natural look. And you can just keep up above. I'm just going to go straight into the yellow because I want it to look a little more yellow up here, because I just think it will show a little bit better against the purple. It actually almost needs a little bit of white in there to get it to show. Let's just see. A little bit better. There. Catching a little light there. So we just keep tinkering with that. And right now my tree looks much more three-dimensional than when I started. And you could keep working on that. It almost looks like it has a red bush at the bottom. I kind of like that because there's sure lots of red bushes at this time of year. But basically what you have now is the basis for all the elements in your painting. And then our last week is going to be spent cleaning up the details, doing a little bit of tinkering with it. Okay, so that's a good spot to leave it at for your third week, and work away on your foreground, your sunflowers, your fence, and your tree.